Hi, everybody. I am Jason Tucker, the co-chair of Console Room 2021 Time Crash, our virtual convention for 2021. I hope you've been enjoying all of the other panels and things that we have going on this weekend. Visited our virtual dealers room, checked out our virtual art show, hung out in our virtual lobby on Discord. With me right now for this panel on comparing streaming services are two former guests of Console Room. We have Dr. Arnold Blumberg. I'll let you introduce yourself, Arnold.
Thank you. Yeah, so Arnold, many of you probably know me. I run ATB Publishing, where we publish books on all manner of things from Doctor Who to Star Trek to all your favorite fictional worlds, nonfiction books, including the legendary Red, White, and Who about the history of Doctor Who fandom in America. And I think that's enough for now. So that's me.
And also with us today is T. Aaron Cisco.
Oh, I'm T. Aaron Cisco. I write some spec fic, and at my day job, I spent way too much of the majority percentage of my adult life in broadcasting. So huge fan of TV, used to work in TV, still work in TV. Big fan of TV.
Great, thank you guys. Thank both of you for attending. What we're going to talk about today is the plethora of streaming services available right now. It's kind of been a bit of an explosion, and especially with 2020 being the pandemic year, a great many people have been making a lot of use of the streaming services. So why don't we start with asking both of you, what are your main streaming sources for media? We'll start with you, T. Aaron.
Oh boy. So quite about 7 years ago now, which is weird to think of, got rid of all non-streaming content. So I don't have one of the converters for digital broadcast, don't have a cable box or any like Xfinity or Dish Network TV. So everything is through one or a few different streamers. I think I go to the same 4 or 5 depending on content. So the big ones that I use the most often would be Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, CBS All Access, and Hulu. Although those are definitely not the only ones that I use. Those are probably just the ones I use the most consistently, like on a daily basis. And then weekly basis, and add in a few more streams there as well. Like D+ is rapidly climbing up the ranks as far as usage as I discover more of their original content.
D+ being Disney+.
Oh, Disney+, yes, sorry, Disney+. Trying to be, all the cool kids with their abbreviations, the abbreves, as they call it. Yes.
Is that what they call it?
Yeah, the abbreves,
Arnold, what about you? What have been your go-to streaming sources this past year?
Years ago, we got a Roku, and we still have, the house is all Verizon Fios, so like phone, internet, everything. And we still have the basic Verizon Fios, so we still have cable, but certainly in the last few years before all this craziness, we had gotten to the point of hardly ever watching anything that could be construed as like regular broadcast or like cable scheduled programming, maybe once in a while. We're a family that still watches Jeopardy a lot, and then we'll put that on. That's about it. So with the Roku, I became so much more comfortable with streaming so that when all this happened, it was already kind of comfortable. Most of the year, the number one thing is Natalie and I tend to watch almost all day and sometimes every day, just endless repeats of every Mystery Science Theater over and over and over again, which is something that's comforting and has become probably our main background through all of 2020. And for that, we use Tubi, which has just about everything on there, but with commercial breaks. or Shout Factory has the stream now that runs 24-hour stream with a lot of stuff. In and around that, I picked up Disney Plus for obvious reasons. They bought my entire childhood, so I had to. And so I go to that for, Marvel and mainly haven't yet because they really haven't gotten to the new stuff they're doing yet, but I'm looking forward to all the Marvel stuff. And like Mandalorian, I wound up watching Mandalorian. I'm trying to think, well, we already had Netflix. We don't use it quite as much anymore. I just bought HBO Max and figured, well, I have to get that. For the most part, though, with Roku, there's so much available with very minimal additional spending that it feels like you have a vast choice of a lot of different things. So we hop around she also has an Amazon Prime account, so we do the Amazon Prime Video too. With all that stuff, really never at a loss to find. We watch a lot of horror movies as comfort food too, and there's not a lot of problem finding things to put on. So I feel like we're kind of getting to the limit of where we bother buying any more, but we'll see how all these things shake out. I think Disney Plus was my main one. I knew I had to buy that, but that's about it.
So you mentioned horror. I know that you do a horror podcast, and I assume that most of your viewing for that comes from Shudder.
Well, thank you for mentioning Ghouls in the House, our podcast, which is, the two of us sitting around watching lots and lots of stuff. Horror, we've tried to expand into sci-fi. And yeah, you're right. Shudder is a great service for horror fans. A lot of what we wind up doing is we just have tons and tons of Blu-rays we bought from Shout Factory. Their Scream Factory label is awesome. I'm still, by the way, since we're talking about streaming, I am still very much a physical media person. If you have something you love, you should still buy it in a physical form because no streaming service is giving you any guarantee you're going to keep access to anything that you care about. So if you can retain it, that's awesome. But yeah, we have used Shudder quite a bit. When we just did our Christmas episode, the only thing I had to do was hop on and see what Shudder got, and we found two things we wanted to talk about, and they're great. And they'd have wonderful documentaries. So really, yeah, with that in the mix, no problem at all finding stuff.
I have already listened to that Christmas episode. It was
entertaining.
Hope
I didn't break anybody's heart about Rare Export.
I was gonna say, who hurt you as a child, Arnold? T. Aaron.
Jewish, there's some issues here, so that's another panel.
Indeed. T. Aaron, what streaming service have you subscribed to? And you're like, I really should cancel this because I subscribed to it and haven't watched nearly enough on it.
Oh boy, I guess all of them at one point or another I felt that way. Well, it kind of it's sort of weird, like to our point about not buying new ones. It's gotten really interesting because when my house decided that we didn't want physical media, that we didn't want broadcast, we could just use at that time like the 3 or 4 services that were out to fulfill all of our visual entertainment needs. It was kind of daunting because we're like, okay, well, back then we had HBO Go, or maybe it was HBO Now, whatever their iteration was, and it really did feel very piecemeal. But now there's all the, I don't know if bundling is the right word, but they call them hubs within it, like with the exception of Disney and Netflix. As far as like the big name streams with Hulu, like, so we watch HBO Max was an addition to Hulu. Our Showtime subscription is through Hulu. And then through Amazon or Amazon Prime, we just added some other like Stars. We've added, that's how we do CBS All Access. So we have access to the stream. So rather than paying all these disparate companies, we're still paying the companies, but we're just adding them into these hubs. Because there are definitely moments where I feel like, even with Netflix, massive library, because they have a ton of original content and indie content that's really deep in there. They don't really promote it. You just kind of use the search bar a lot, or you dig around online and find out like, oh, this interesting film or this series has been picked up by Netflix. It still feels like, okay, I've watched everything I want to watch. Or you get a taste for something and the streams just haven't signed the right deal. So like, I love Cosa Nostra and true crime, organized crime in both America and Europe. Just fascinated by that. And from a historical standpoint, there's not a ton of content out there like that. So to Arnold's point, yes, I do agree. Hold on to things. I have a lot of like old VHS and DVDs and Blu-rays of stuff that just I was worried it wouldn't be able to be found, and so far I've been lucky. Once it is found, I'm nervous that I'll probably like be impulsive to get rid of these DVDs. Never get rid of my VHS just because I love it. My kids don't know what they are; they think they're big books or or whatever. Um, but yeah, I think really Amazon, because there's so much when you get past the surface level, and maybe that's something we should dive into, is like how the streaming platforms format their content, how they present it. Because Amazon has hundreds of thousands of titles and all kinds of genres, from short films and one-offs through feature-length films to full series that were independently produced, but they don't hype that on their homepage. That's like, you got to do that deep dive, those searches. Sometimes they won't pop up even if you're looking specifically for urban legend anthology sci-fi horror series, which sounds like just enough meta tags to find exactly what you want, to find the series lore. But it won't come up. You'll find American Horror Story, you'll find other paid content that's a little bit bigger, a little bit sexier. But if you go to the search bar and then type in lore, then the first thing that comes up is this great, very underrated series called Lore, which is an urban legend anthology sci-fi horror series that was, I don't think it was independently produced, but definitely lower budget than, say, Dimension 405 or Black Mirror, but it's in that vein. So I think I get, or used to get, very daunted by the apparent limitations of the streams until really doing that deep dive. Because you'll see those, you see the news reports like Netflix signs crazy deal. They now have like 355,000 new movies. And you're like, oh, that sounds insane. But then when you go to the platform, you're like, oh, it really looks more like 150, 200, which is still a lot, but nowhere near like the hundreds of thousands and seemingly endless options you have. So I think that's where does that make sense? That's where that kind of comes into play, where it feels like there's a lot less than there is. But once you get past that hurdle, it's like, oh, okay, this is how I can find a lot more content.
Absolutely. Arnold, is that what you're finding?
Yeah, I mean, there's several things he brought up that I really want to respond to. Is all brilliant observations about this thing, and I'm sure we all share similar experiences. Like, so often we're looking for something to watch. I mean, we know the kind of things we love. It's not like we can't figure that part out. So we're looking, oh, we want to put on a movie, we want to put on a show, we want something horror, we want comedy, and then wind up spending 30 to 45 minutes to an hour just searching through everything. And there's something to the point that the more choices you have, the harder it gets. That's one aspect of it. There's also the fact that it's hard to find. Things are hard to find. Like he was saying, like tagging is an issue, finding things is an issue. Needing to figure out a way to short circuit the algorithms and get around and find the stuff you want can be difficult. Some things that, like Tierra was saying, is the idea that paid things or things that are more popular probably are paying to make sure they hit higher in the searches. They don't want you to find everything necessarily, because they want you to find the stuff they want you to look at. And they may have signed the deal and dumped a lot of stuff in their service, but they may also have three things they got a big deal they wanted out there. So you got to figure out, how do you get around that? How do you find the things you want? And searching becomes a skill you got to develop. But then the other side of it is, and I've often talked to students about this, is we're in a world where we feel like we have so much, but really a lot of streaming services have helped to make the experience of media a subtractive experience rather than an additive one. There's a lot of stuff, for example, that if you're of a certain age, we all grew up with, watched, that you can't find anywhere streaming online. There's a lot of stuff that's not making it onto any service. Maybe it's not financially viable. Maybe it's just not the time right now, but there are things you will never find. And so it's not as big a bounty as it seems. And then there's also a lot of stuff you don't want. So you also have to figure out how to search to find the things. We often have to wind up looking on the computer and like getting online and just searching on the web for, let's find the thing, and then we'll see what pops up and we'll say, oh, look, that's on Hulu right now. Rather than search inside the streaming services for it, we'll look outside and find, oh, okay, that's on there. And or get disappointed when it's on Epix or something. We don't have that right now. Yeah. But it's tough to find the things that you want. And I mean, I'm still, like I was saying, I still love physical media, and I still have the idea of retaining a lot of that. So we got drawers full of, horror and zombie stuff on Blu-ray and everything. So, and TV, I just bought a box set of the 80s Buck Rogers, which I still haven't gotten to yet, but damn, I can't wait. I can't wait for that one. And it's like, I'm sure it's on streaming somewhere, but want to make sure I have it. So
what, give me an example of something that you would love to watch if it was on streaming someplace, but isn't. Maybe you might even sign up for a new service if this service had that treasure that you've been looking for.
That's a tough one. I don't have anything immediately in mind. It's just, if we're just to save time, the first thing that pops into my mind is there was a lot of great like horror TV movies of the 70s and early 80s. Lots of them the networks did, that they're not all easily available. And of course, a lot of this stuff might be, there's so many rights issues with certain things that they're never going to turn up. Like, like maybe a song appears in one of these things and they're never going to bother to clear that because the money wouldn't be worth it to them to do that, that kind of thing. But some stuff from the 70s, I guess, there's a lot of stuff that's missing, and a lot of also a lot of short run TV shows that maybe only ran like half a season or like 13 episodes at a time, where that was really weird to have like a half season with 13 episodes. I don't even remember, like Sci-Fi Channel years ago used to do like the one season wonder stuff where they would run the really short run shows.
Sure.
It's hard to find that even on streaming, where that doesn't seem to matter. It wouldn't matter. I think it's mainly a financial thing. Like maybe it's just not worth it to them to buy them up, but I'd love to see more of these short run little shows that we all, Otherworld is one of the others I think of from the 80s. These weird little curios.
Otherworld, the one where it was the family that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and one of the kids from the sitcom set with Howard Hessman as the teacher.
Head of the class.
Head of the class, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yeah. It's the one where they fell through the pyramid in Egypt and they went to the alternate reality.
Yep.
And they never had an ending. I just saw Jim just popped on the chat. Man from Atlantis. There's another great one. Yeah. There's a lot of that. And like the more, I guess by now you'd say obscure, and the more limited things that maybe they're not the best money makers, but it'd be so much fun to revisit that. Do a streaming service. It's all like one season shows, and
I would say, Sci-Fi needs to do a streaming service, but considering what Sci-Fi is these days, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
That's a monkey right there.
I think they're NBC, aren't they? They might be NBC Universal.
I'm not sure.
In which case, anything Sci-Fi should theoretically go through Peacock if they do.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
T. Aaron, what about same question? What would you wish you could find on streaming that you would?
I have this conversation maybe once a week, once a month with different people in different places. Just because, so I'll present it like this. Like the pitch would be called Let's See, so which means let's look under the counter. Because I came up mostly in the 80s, where comic shops were kind of like the hub for all of your like countercultural, subversive, unknown, deep cut stuff. And they always had under the counter, which is where they kept like their imports of like questionably dubbed anime and like bootleg concerts and all kinds of cool stuff that you find there. And so that streaming service would be nothing but that content. And I actually have 3 examples of this weird format called VHS that I mentioned before. It looks like a book. But this is my favorite movie of all time. This is Being Human by Robin Williams. It came out in '94. It's only available to rent on the various streaming services. Like if you have Amazon Video, you can pay like $2-3 for it. If you have Vudu, I think it's $2, iTunes, etc. But it's not available on the streaming services. You can rent it. But it's a fabulous movie, and I'm not sure why. Maybe it was like Arnold was saying, kind of a rights issue because there's some cool music in there in some of the sequences. But like, yeah, so I can't find that. And then getting deeper down. So as a big fan of cheesecake properties, there used to be this company growing up in the lower Midwest in Chicago. There's a company called Something Weird, which I think was actually based in Seattle, Washington, or somewhere.
Something Weird was an awesome company. They did a lot of rare horror and other stuff too.
Fantastic. And we used to do their mail order because you'd sign up the old-fashioned way, like you literally sign up like pen paper and mail it through the post office, and then they would send you like a paper catalog with numbers, and you'd write down like, I want this. And as a huge fan of cheesecake art and photography, I had many people went through a Betty Page phase, and they have Teaserama. Ooh, Teaserama. This is the actual, like Bunny Yeager did a lot of the films. There's Sybil St. Clair, all these classic cheesecake pinup artist, but he can't find it on streaming. So I would love to see that. And then lastly, and this is definitely a pipe dream, but that look under the counter aspect, the best part was the stuff that you're not really supposed to have. So there were 3 Fantastic Four movies that were released in theaters, but there were not 3 Fantastic Four movies. There were 4 Fantastic Four movies, the first of which was by who I think is one of the greatest, most underrated filmmakers of all time, Roger Corman, who did it just so they could retain the rights. And I think he had like $1 million budget or something like that.
Yep.
It's a horrible movie, but fan effing tastic. See what I did there? Huh? But it can't be found on streaming. I know this isn't like what weird stuff does Taylor have in his basement, but the Fantastic Four bootleg of the Roger Corman.
Oh my God, you have the bootleg box.
Yes.
I have that same box.
Yes. Like, but that's the kind of gold stuff that you're not going to find on streaming services. It's even hard to find them on things like YouTube and Vimeo, which do tend to have a lot of that under the counter feel sometimes. Like when trying to find like Blake 7, which I was a huge fan of the reruns growing up. I don't think Blake 7 is streaming anywhere, but I can go to YouTube and I can watch most of the episodes, and they might not be in order, but someone has uploaded them. The same thing with a lot of Saturday syndication. Like as I came into like high school and college in the 90s, Saturday syndicated shows, I was a huge fan. Jack of all trades, Cleopatra 2525, Hercules and Xena are a little bit bigger, and I think those are available on some different streams. But there were tons and tons of syndicated programs for years. That whole decade of the 90s, Renegade the series, Nightman, there's so many Earth Final Conflict, Andromeda.
There's all those short run shows. Like I was saying, there's no place to find that stuff.
Nobody's got them. And that's a huge, I mean, you're talking about like a 10, 15 year period with tens of millions of viewers that in our age group, our generation, we can't find this unless you happen to luck out and be a weirdo like me who saved a bunch of like 25, 30-year-old VHS tapes. They're just kind of gone. Or
and a VHS player.
Yeah, and a working VCR, which is actually the worst part. Got like sort of a gift of the Magi thing. Have all these old VHS tapes and no way to play them. But I think finding a lot of those syndicated Saturday programs and those rarities, that is one of the things that I miss about broadcasts. We used to watch Svengoolie growing up in Chicago as a kid, which was this guy who dressed sort of like an Undertaker pimp kind of a character, Rich Coase, and he would show just really obscure random horror films. But there isn't really a service that does that, probably because of the business model. You can't just randomly pick something to throw up for a week or two. You have to make that investment. And so the good part about that is like, oh, we're getting a lot of quality content out there. The bad part is, of course, you miss these opportunities to find something, these offbeat, weird, funky, questionable legality properties that were enjoyed and could be enjoyed by tons of folks. They just don't have any place to find them.
By the way, what you were just saying about Svengoolie, so like he's still on. He still does a show every week, and it's syndicated. And yeah, he still does it every week. It's on, and it's carried by local affiliates. And
see, he needs
in
to
our area
service.
In our area, it's only they put it on to like 8 o'clock in the evening, which doesn't make any sense on a Saturday. It should be like 11. But the thing is, like you were saying about the horror host thing, Count Gordy Vall was my horror host growing up. He was on the Washington, D.C. station. I had 2. In Baltimore, there was a ghost host, but Gordy Vall became more like nationally known. And he is and has for many years been running his own website and doing a weekly streaming service where he does his horror hosting streaming. But here's the thing, like you were pointing out about limitations. He only does public domain stuff because he's doing it basically himself. So there's this limitation. Imagine if he had just even the minuscule budget to be able to buy some more material and do that. But in a way, we've kind of segued to the kind of curation that happens on a thing like Shudder, where they now do like have a much different opinion of him. That's for another time. Like you got Joe Bob Briggs, for instance. They brought him back, and now he's on Shudder. So they're bringing back a little of that. And they have the access to stuff because they have money and licensing, and they can do, big name horror stuff. But I'm totally on board with your I think that's a great mesh of some of our ideas. The idea of a streaming service that gives you the joy of finding the rare and obscure and odd thing. I mean, I'm sure there are channels that are like that, but we need more of that kind of thing to shed light on the stuff that's being forgotten.
Well, the tricky part too with that business model is that so often the streaming companies they'll just look at it's just simple math. It's like it's cheaper for, say, Amazon to just give people a ton of money so they can redo a Tales from the Crypt like show.
Yeah.
Like, we're just gonna pay this group, we'll give them a big check, they'll make a few episodes, we'll throw it out there, as opposed to paying the licensing rights and the releases and the residuals to take the, I think it was like 5-6 seasons, the original Tales from the Crypt run back on
Well, also, if they
HBO.
do it the way you're saying, they know they own it.
Right.
So they don't want to deal with licensing. So that's why Netflix slowly segued more and more toward look at all of our Netflix originals, whether they bought it outright or they made it, they want stuff they own. So yeah.
Everyone's turning to that, was it Blue Moon Studios, that for a while, in that weird gray area between more people were renting from like the blockbusters before we all shifted over to streaming. There's that one production company whose sole purpose seemed to be like, we're going to go right up against IP without crossing the line. So when Transformers came out, there'd be Transmorphers next to it. Or
well,
like
Asylum's one of them.
Asylum.
They do like the mockbusters. Yeah,
Yes.
right. Sharknado is all Asylum stuff. Yeah.
Which is sort of like, it feels like, I love all my streaming services, but it feels often that a lot of the original content, especially the lesser known stuff, is basically the mockbuster version, where it's like, well, this feels a lot like an updated version of this show.
Yeah.
But they're thinking, well, maybe they didn't buy this show because it was too expensive, so they went and made just close enough that it would feel familiar, but not so much they get a cease and desist from the original.
That makes sense. Yeah, I think you're right.
Is there, sorry, cattail, just
A new panelist.
Indeed. Is there anything that has been announced that y'all are excited for to be coming out on a streaming service in the next year or so? I just started reading the Wheel of Time series, and Amazon is supposed to have a Wheel of Time series. Likewise, they're going to be doing their, I don't know what they're calling it, but it's the Tolkien Second Age or Middle Earth series. Maybe that's what it, I mean, they can't really call it Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit because it's Second Age. So maybe they're just calling it Middle Earth. But is there anything coming up from any of the streaming services that excites you?
Well, as I was saying before, the reason I got Disney Plus primarily was because all of the new Marvel stuff that was going to be being produced specifically for that. And especially given the year we've been through, the fact that the weight of a lot of that ongoing saga now rests on the shoulders of whatever Disney Plus does, makes it even more of a level of anticipation for me. You know, I can't wait for WandaVision, which sounds like that'll be the first thing out of the gate in just a couple weeks, to basically continue the next phase of things. And I'm looking forward to everything they're doing there. I'm sure not all of it will work necessarily, but I know that they have a handle on making stuff in that universe that makes me happy. So that part I'm looking forward to. I've enjoyed some of The Mandalorian. I grew up a massive, I consider I have the right to say first generation Star Wars fan because it was the first movie I saw in the theater. I never stayed as much a Star Wars fan as some people stayed. So I dip in and out, and I've enjoyed some of Mandalorian. I'm mildly interested in some other things they're doing, but for me, it's Marvel. And I'm also interested in seeing what they do with that Lord of the Rings stuff. I don't know for sure if it's anything I'll wind up caring about enough to stick with, but I'm kind of intrigued if they're intending to make it so that it feels like you could fit it with the Jackson films, because it sounds like that's kind of what they want to do. Like, they're not necessarily saying this doesn't, fit within the same universe as that movie version of things, but it also sounds like they might be trying to be cagey about it. Like, they want to distance it enough so that if they want to, they could say, yes, but we're not really part of Peter Jackson's vision of Middle Earth. So I don't quite know what they're doing with it, and I'm interested to see what that would be. So those are the things I'm looking forward to right now. Oh yeah, and more Lower Decks, which was of all the new Star Trek, that was the one that I enjoyed 100%, had no qualms about, thought it was wonderful, and we need much more of that. So Lower Decks.
Aaron?
For new content, since you mentioned all the Marvel stuff, I'll flip it. I'm looking forward to the Lois and Superman series that's going to be joining the Arrowverse. I'm not a huge fan of the Arrowverse per se. I've enjoyed Like I like Supergirl. I've liked some episodes and some of the arcs in Arrow and the Flash. Legends of Tomorrow, which I think is technically a part of the Arrowverse, but by itself is a lot of fun. But Lois and Superman looks to be interesting because I used to like that old show Lois and Clark with Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher way back when. This looks to be sort of an updated version, but having that sort of more muted humor of the Arrowverse as opposed to like the dramedy feel of Lois and Clark. Again, they've released one very short teaser trailer, but still looks good. And then on the Marvel side, I am definitely looking forward to Miss Marvel as one of their announced series. That looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. Netflix has Hit and Run coming out with Sanaa Lathan, which is going to be a mini series, only about 8 or 9 episodes in that, but it's a crime thriller. But it's, Sanaa Lathan, who doesn't do nearly enough. She's been in a few different projects over here, so this looks to be her star turn. And a lot of these short run series have been some of my favorites. Like Hulu had a show called Woke, and I blanking on the lead actor's name. Sadly, his other big role was as like the colored fella in New Girl. That was kind of like, I think the character had a name, but I'm pretty sure it was like the black dude. But he's really funny in Rogue. Also looking forward to way more Star Trek. I'm actually looking forward to season 3 of Twilight Zone, Jordan Peele's take for CBS All Access. The first season was okay, but nowhere near Black Mirror levels of anthology, and definitely neither of which is near Rod Serling's original. Season 2, I thought improved, like went miles beyond season 1, and so hopefully they'll keep in that vein, and season 3 will be even better. Like they'll find their footing. And then also looking forward to more Star Trek Discovery, because this current season is phenomenal. I mean, Star Trek has done nothing wrong and can't do anything wrong because all Trek is good Trek. Slightly biased, big Trekkie, but Discovery is just incredible. Also a big fan of Lower Decks, but just looking forward to seeing where they go next with it, and really catching up on some of the series that I missed. I know that wasn't exactly the spirit of the question about what new stuff, but there have been so many cool little one-offs. Even HBO Max has been like pumping out things. So their HBO, there was a series called Run, which came with Domhnall, I'm going to mispronounce his name, but Domhnall Gleeson,
Okay.
General Lux. That was supposed to be really good, so that's in my queue to check out. And just a lot of fun things, and of course more Who as that goes on, because Chibnall seems to have finally figured out that he's writing, he's still writing Doctor Who, and so he's allowed to like have some fun with it and write some Doctor Who episodes, because Jodie is hands down just amazing. And now that they've gotten rid of, can I spoil that? I can spoil that. You're at Council Room. Of course, it's already happened in the latest series of Who. So now that we got rid of Graham, and we can finally focus on the Doctor and Yaz, hopefully get rid of Yaz and just have the Doctor and Missy come back to fight against O, and that would be fantastic, because when's the last time we had 2 Time Lords, 2 bona fide Time Lords? Was it Romana 2? Like, it's been way too long. Dr. Donna doesn't count. She was only a halvesy. Like, 2 full-blood Gallifreyans, Jodie Whittaker, Michelle Gomez. That's just fan wishing right there. But I am looking forward to more Doctor Who, of course. Because who isn't?
Sure. I mean, speaking of catching up on old stuff and everything, has there been a series that, because it's been available on streaming, you've been able to binge, that you have binged in the last year, and something more than just a 5 or 6 episode series, something that's like meaty, something that you really dug into because you had access to it on streaming?
Absolutely. For me, it's been Altered Carbon, which is like, what if Doctor Who was produced by Americans, for better and worse? There's only 3 seasons, but it was really good. I was like, what is this? Where did this come from? And like season 2, it's got like Anthony Mackie's in the mix, so there's some big names attached to it, but it's so good, and like no one was talking about it. It just kind of showed up. Like the premise is intriguing, where like rich people take over the bodies of. It's really good, and I just burned through that so quickly. And another show on Netflix, Versailles, which is a period piece about the court of Louis XIV. It's so good. And again, one of those things like no one's talking about, because it was buried deep in like the annals of their search reservoir, and I had to go pull it out. And finally I was like, oh, since you like the Tudors, since you like the Borgias, since you like these other period pieces with like heavy political intrigue, why don't you watch this amazing period piece that's heavy on political intrigue? It's like, why did you tell me that months ago? I've been looking for this. It's so good.
Who was in? There was somebody relatively famous leading in Versailles.
Louis the 14th.
Yeah, I don't remember the act. I remember I watched the first episode of Versailles specifically because it had an actor in it who, of course, I'm forgetting now. And that was such a long time ago. Arnold, what about you? What is there anything you binged? Because streaming is for, when we say streaming, but really it's more of a fire hose.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. The more I think about it, particularly while Tiernan was talking too, it's like what we've wound up doing is we kind of use it as a way of providing a lot of background for our day, and we're both working from home. So like this year, of course, is a bizarre, crucible for figuring out how all this works. And like it's a lot of Mystery Science Theater. That's just our go-to. It's like the most comforting thing, and we watch them over and over and over again. Find that for the most part for us, binging shows, scripted shows, doesn't work much. Like I think she's been rewatching things she's seen, like Call the Midwife and Dexter, I think more recently, because she wanted to get ready for the new Dexter that's going to be coming along. They're doing a new. For me, I find that binging scripted stuff doesn't work for me too well. And I've tended for some reason not to go back to things I've seen already. And the thing we seem to find the most comfort in binging, if anything, is reality shows. So we have a lot of shows, whether it's whatever RuPaul is doing or, shows that ran already. Sometimes we look for ones that are like a few years old that like maybe the show itself is gone now, but we'll go through, oh, look, it's a show all about tattoo artists having a competition. We'll watch all 3 years of that and we go, done. And so we've been doing a lot of that. It's a lot of, what is it, Ink Wars, I think was that. We ran through that. We ran through a couple years of these guys in Vegas that were like repairing other people's tattoos, RuPaul stuff. So it's reality show binging for us.
Sure.
And there's again, it's comfort. There's the whole structure of those shows. It starts to become so obvious as the same skeleton. Like all they do is pour different people into it. Like it's the same exact show, only drag queens, the same exact show, only tattoo artists, the same thing. And we like that. So that's been our big binging thing for the year. It's been lots and lots of competition reality shows. And weirdly, now that I think of it, gives us an opportunity to also figure in horror and sci-fi and some of the fanish things we like, because you notice also most of those shows usually have people competing in them who are horror and sci-fi and fantasy fans. And a lot of the stuff they wind up doing creatively in those shows, usually there's at least one episode where it's like, here's our Halloween episode. Now you're going to be doing monsters. And it's like, okay, we can go along with that. It's awesome. And so that's been our thing. Our thing is binging reality stuff.
Sure. So speaking of binging, there is kind of a big debate over what is the preferred way of releasing content, especially when it comes to streaming. And that is everything all at once, so you can binge it, or the traditional once a week model, maybe priming the pump by releasing 2 episodes the first week, and then weekly after that. I know that that debate has raged online since almost the beginning of streaming. What is the better way to do? Arnold, what is your thought on the 2 different models?
Well, I guess just accepting as understood all the built-in biases that I would have, being who I am and the age I am and the experience I had growing up with regular traditional television, accepting all that as first as a foundation, I would say that I definitely think the better way is the weekly rollout. Now, I mean, no problem with anybody that loves the binging thing, and that's wonderful. And I think there are times where it's kind of neat, the idea that like, you're waiting for something and here's all 10 of them or all 8 of them right away. The problem I see with that, the problem that on the business side, they have also clearly identified, which is why Disney Plus and CBS All Access are sticking to I guess what you could argue is the more traditional weekly model is, you lose a hell of a lot when you dump everything at 3 a.m. on one night. The problem is, forget all the social media bull about arguing about spoilers and all that sensitivity, and don't worry about any of that. There's arguments on both sides of that too. How long do you wait to say something? Should someone stay off the internet? Forget all that part. The problem is, you dump everything in one night. There will be people who have the stamina to watch it all that night, and by like 10 o'clock the next morning say, I'm done. And then you see the next day articles on every website saying, so let's talk about that ending. And it's like, look, apart from the fact, the spoiler part, forget that part. It's like, can you give me a minute maybe to catch up? Like, I don't have that same ability maybe. And the other problem is, look at the weeks and weeks of media coverage and focus on their property and all the money they spent on it, and the fan conversation that they lose by putting it all out at once. You get like one big hit that weekend and maybe a few other conversations. By a few weeks, people have forgotten that show even exists. And we've seen that happen a lot. With the weekly rollout, you get 8, 10 different hits with people doing nothing but talking about your show. Can you imagine the experience of The Mandalorian if they dumped all of it on the one night? And we would have heard about the ending of season 2, for example. And for anybody that hasn't yet, I won't say, but like if you hadn't seen that ending, you would have heard about it already that one night. And it's just insane. So I think for many reasons, not least business, but also I feel like the best possible fan experience of us all sharing the joy together, it works better when you roll it out week to week and give people a little time to talk about and say, oh, what's coming next? What are they going to do? And enjoy that sense of anticipation. I don't have any problem with people that like it the other way. I just think that it makes more sense to do it that way. So there's my take on it.
How do you feel, Tierra?
I mean, I think it comes down to personal preference. For me personally, kind of like just similar disclaimer as Arnold had, like taking into consideration my background and like my schedules and how I've come to find shows and things like that. So having all that on the table, which for those who don't know, like I, having worked in broadcasting, I didn't have a normal schedule. I could be home every night back in the 90s and early 2000s to watch something as it aired. And a lot of shows I just didn't see until they were available as like the full season on DVD. So I used to do the old school binge where you go to like your local Blockbuster, grab season 1, disc 1 and 2, season 1, disc 2 and 3, et cetera, and then watch them all in like a weekend because I didn't have time to do it. And I love that. That's how I found so many new shows, or shows I didn't even hear of or didn't hear about, like Arrested Development, which I feel was actually designed, you had to binge those first 3 seasons or else it didn't make sense to try and keep it piecemeal because there's so many in-jokes and callbacks. So that in consideration, my personal preference is to have everything done, since everything is done already, put it out there and then let people watch it as they want. So like currently Letterkenny season 9 just debuted on December 26th, the day after Christmas. And I've done a really, really good job for this 9th season that I didn't do in the previous seasons, because previous seasons I just, cool, it's the day after Christmas, I'm not working, I'm just gonna watch everything, get out of the way and be done with it. But I've been able to kind of like, all right, I'll watch an episode now, then I'll space it out, then watch another episode another day, then space it out. But the fact that I can make that choice of saying like, all right, I want to watch it piecemeal, or you know what, I just want to sit down and watch the whole thing in one go, like Hell on Wheels, which was a show on AMC that was, I think, really, really well done. Anson Mount, Common, a lot of great names, Cole Meany, missed it in its initial run on AMC, sat down, watched the entire show, watched the entire series, and that's one that it's kind of like that prestige television of the mid-aughts to, I guess now we're still technically in that era, but really around that late 90s, early 2000s, mid 2000s era of prestige TV where every episode ended on a cliffhanger. Like that would have driven me nuts. And I've left shows for trying to do cliffhangers or trying to obviously to do what they used to do in broadcasting, which was you got to around April, May, and it was time to cut it off for sweeps because then you had the summer break and you wanted people to come back in the fall to watch. And I don't have time for that because now the options are there's so much more to watch, or it's like, all right, if you can't resolve this, I'm done. I kind of tapped out of like Walking Dead for that reason, where it's sort of like, and guess what's gonna happen next? Like, I don't care. Like you need to tell a story that I want to keep hearing, not tell me half the story so I have to watch to finish it. Again, personal viewing preference. And I know that some channels have done really, really well. Like HBO has put out some fantastic television that warrants repeated viewings. But again, that wait time in the middle. So I think if they want to deal stuff out piecemeal in that weekly schedule, I'm okay with that. If maybe instead of 7 days, they shortened it to say every 3 days. So we got like a bi-weekly release, because the content's finished. Like they don't shoot those like they did sitcoms back in the day, where you meet on Sunday night and then you write, rehearse, and then shoot. So again, we can air the following week. Like everything's in the can and ready to go. They're just holding it back from distribution. So since everything's done, maybe instead of every Sunday night, it's every Sunday and Wednesday, there's a new episode. And that way you still get some time to have that anticipation, but not so much time that you lose interest. That feels like a best of both worlds model, and maybe too ideal.
It'd be interesting to see somebody. I mean, the thing is, it isn't just these two choices. First of all, I think there's room for all of it, and I think there's argument for everything. I also think it's kind of interesting that the way you put it, the binging seems to work well when particularly when it's something that already has done its first whole run and you're discovering it. You want to consume it. You want to get, oh, I can't wait. And in a way, that means that there are people for whom they're doing the weekly dole out of some things who may like figure, well, you know what, I'll wait until it's all out and then I'll do that. That way, then the binge remains in your control, you know. But it isn't just two. It isn't like a binary choice. So I love your idea, because like there's plenty of room. Why don't they experiment more? Why don't they try what you just said and do like every 3 days is a thing, or dump like a couple episodes at a time and try some things, because there's plenty of technological opportunity here to give a lot of these a shot and see what people gravitate to and how they enjoy it. And maybe it'll be the case that some people will like, you know, some people like it one way, some people like it another way. It would be worth experimenting a little bit.
Well,
I think it's a great idea.
Because I think we are past, as a culture, at least in Western culture, in a pop cultural sense, we're past the point of like destination or appointment television. I would argue that at best, maybe the last season of Game of Thrones could be counted as like, okay, if you didn't see it now, like that was a moment. But I feel like we've kind of moved past that, just because there are so many choices. It's so hyper niche if you want it to be. And because there is stuff that hasn't gone away. Like I have friends who don't really watch any new content because they're like, why do I need to do that? All my favorite stuff is right here. I can just watch it and enjoy it as I want. They might sit through something if I keep bugging them about checking it out. But in essence, they're like, I know what I like. This is what I'm going to watch. So the whole idea of you got to see it, you got to be there, because of the water cooler phenomenon of like, oh, did you see last night's episode? I feel like we're not there anymore. We've moved past that. Not that it's like a progress or regress. We're just not there anymore.
I agree. And I also, I mean, for all the things I like about the weekly dole out of something that I do like, it's less driven for me personally about the water cooler thing. Like the other flip side of that is the effect social media has had. I find that very often my visceral response to people telling me I have to see this new thing is to say, I'm not watching that now because you want me to see. Like, there's a certain kind of almost aggressive pressure that comes where people say, this is the most amazing thing in the world. You have to watch this. Guess what? No, I don't have to. And I did. I also got pushed out of Walking Dead. For me, it was like, there was a point where I realized, look, this show will only ever tell the same story. I see this. This was years ago, Jason. It finally reached a point where I thought, A, they will only ever be telling the same story over and over again anyway, which is all they do. Every year is the same story. Will we finally find peace in this new? Of course you won't, because here comes the other psychopaths. And then, and to me, it got to the point where the violence had reached a level where it was being promoted on the basis of, look how cool this violence is toward characters you love, that I found the night I watched the premiere in question, this was the one where Glenn and Negan, I watched that premiere and have rarely felt so completely depressed and sad and physically ill. And it isn't that I haven't seen tons of gore, but it was like the gore was promoted. Like they were excited to share this with you. Watch the horrific murder of someone you love, because that's what we're presenting tonight in prime time on AMC. And I thought, you know, I'm done with all of you. And then I never looked back. I looked back once. I watched the one where they said Rick was supposed to go away. And then it turned out it was a trick for a backdoor pilot into a series of movies. I thought, you got me the one time. I'm not coming back again. That's it. But yeah, I agree with you.
that is what it comes down to, I think, in essence. Like whether it's the binge format or weekly dole out, it comes down to the story being told and how it's being told. And if the content's not there, like HBO released two in the last 2 years, they've released two pieces of television I think are just unparalleled, phenomenal. One was Lovecraft Country, and the other was The Watchmen, which wasn't really an adaptation so much as an inspiration, as its own. Those were fantastic, both released weekly. But I've gone back twice in the past. I mean, it's been this is 2020. Yeah, so about a little over a year. I've watched Watchmen twice, the entire series. Like I watched it as it came out when it was on. And then after finishing Lovecraft Country, I was like, well, let me go back because I remember I like Watchmen too. Let's compare. Like that was win-win. Like everything's great. But that's because of the storytelling. It held up for that once a week, here's a new episode, but it also holds up that it's like, okay, I can sit down for 4 or 5 hours and just watch a big chunk of episodes at once, and it's still engaging, it's still gripping. I don't feel.
Another thing that what you're saying reminds me of is like a main thing we certainly should mention before we're done is the way in which, look at it from the other side, the way in which streaming services have influenced the creation of content and the telling of stories. And I'm not saying this necessarily is good or bad. It's just a thing. But like, for instance, one example of this is we get all these shows, right? And they come out now, the standard seems to be like 8-10 episodes a show. But then they'll always tell you the same thing, which is what we're really making is an 8-hour movie. And really, in a sense, that's true. What they've really done is they've scripted a complete story and split it up into chunks. The chunks of which are not necessarily beholden anymore to a particular time slot because they don't have a commercial slot to put in, but they still sort of fall. There's still sort of an ingrained sense that like, oh, it's a drama. Maybe it should be about 40 minutes, or it's a comedy. Maybe it should be a little shorter. And that's from television. But I think what we're getting now is, what are these things? Like, they're not really serialized storytelling in the way that television was. They're not movies in the sense that they're running 8 to 10 hours instead of 2 or 3, but it's different. It's a different kind of thing. Like you said, the story should be the crux of it. And maybe the story is an 8-hour story that unfolds and you watch it at your leisure, and maybe you watch bits of it, but it's a different thing. It's not serialized television. It's not movies. It's a different kind of thing. And I think we're just in the early days of what that actually is, but we'll see.
It's the bedtime phenomenon. Like when you're a little kid, or not you, but I was personally, when I was a little kid, before I could read, and even a little bit afterwards, when my reading wasn't super strong, I liked a lot of really nerdy books. I was a huge fan of the Three Musketeers books. Those are not nighttime stories. So what my mom or dad would do was they would read a chapter or two. Now, sometimes it was a self-contained mini story or mini arc within that chapter, because that's just sort of the way that was written. Or that chapter was written, or sometimes it was just sort of a filler chapter where it's like we're getting the stage for something that's coming. Other times it was kind of like we're starting at the picking up from the last chapter, and then this is going to end on a cliffhanger, quote unquote, because you got to get to the next. And it feels like that's what a lot of stream content is doing, the stream original content, where it's like you're getting a piece of it. It's not like to your point, yeah, it's definitely not like the serials we got with like Deep Space Nine and Babylon 5, where it's like, okay, here's this episode, and you know that this is just episode 3 out of 22 for this season, and it's just another chunk as we're building to a climax. But it's at the same time, it's also not like a Black Mirror or Dimension 404 or Room 101, where it's like, or even American Horror Story for that matter, where it's like, this is all you need. You can watch this in any order. Like, it's still that weird. So I absolutely agree. It's this kind of weird, nebulous, kind of funky space that we're in now, but we're getting so much great content, which also brings another point. Speaking of content and storytelling, the opportunities that have been presented to creators who would not have had them under the old network model. When we're seeing more content of people of color creating it, we're seeing content that's not on the cis hetero binary. We're seeing more content that's in the alphabet soup, in the LGBTQIA plus. I think I got all of them right there, maybe. But we're just getting much more. We're getting more folks telling more stories in more platforms, which we could, like, sure, Hollywood and the studio system maybe would have gotten there without streaming to kind of push them along. But I think streaming has definitely been like, we don't have to wait for, here's this great series that's all about like a bunch of crazy Black dudes who are just making fun of each other, which is great. Astronomy Club on Netflix. It's sort of like, what if SNL was funny, one, and also what if SNL was funny and only specifically about like upper middle and middle class Black experience of people born 1995 and 1990. Like it's so hyper specific. There's like the reference they have in Ice Cube Day, where everyone just dresses up like Ice Cube movies. It's again, it's one of those things like this would probably not have gotten a green light from like an NBC, a CBS, Fox. Even they probably would have like maybe they would have thrown it out in the summer, and then like you never would have heard of it again. But we get Astronomy Club now because Netflix doesn't care. It's like, sure, we'll throw it up there. Somebody will watch it.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, and not only that, it's like even in the areas of like the privileged side of things where you figure like Disney, they got more money than, I mean, they could do whatever the hell they want. And yet, even so, you would never have seen the kind of stuff we're getting without the streaming platform concept to carry it, because they wouldn't have had a place to deliver it to. Like, so even for them, it's like, yeah, we could have spent the money, but the Mandalorian, for example, would never have existed.
Yes.
Because where would that have gone? You know, so there's that, the voices that we don't get to hear in any mainstream conduits that have an opportunity, which in a way neatly brings us back to the beginning of all this, because what becomes key in all this for everyone is searching well and finding these things, because they might be getting the opportunity to tell their story, but it's going to get lost amid the 40 other Netflix originals that week unless you know where to find it. And it's like, so like it behooves all of us to really keep looking, because it is an amazing opportunity for so many people.
Absolutely. And I don't mean to poop on D+. I realize I mentioned it once, but I recommend Pixar in real life. That is like such a perfect example of a stream only show, because each episode is like 2 to 8 minutes. So they even call it a show is kind of a stretch. It's more like these shorts. And it's sort of a candid camera show based on Pixar being played out in real life on unsuspecting people. So it's like this weird kind of, my favorite episode, they have this pair of twins who play Dash from The Incredibles, and he's just a kid hanging out downtown New York, and he's going to people like, hey, could you do me a favor? I'm trying to like get a scholarship or whatever. Can you time me? I'm gonna run around this block. And the guy is like, grab a stopwatch, like, all right, go kid. And he runs around the corner, and then immediately his twin comes around the other side. They're like, whoa, what? And it's like silly stuff like that. They open up a Gas and Go, which is a company from Wally, where they're promoting like this new line of, you know, liquefied foods, so that way you don't have to waste time chewing. And they've got all the branding, and people are just kind of like, oh yeah, this is pretty good. I like the cheeseburger, I like the pizza. This is weird. And like, we also have new plans to have this ship in orbit. And it's so cute seeing people like get it or not get it. They have like, it's so good. But that's another one. Like, where are you going to put a show that's entire series is half an hour? You know,
well, that's the other thing. They're like Disney and a lot of other places have started reviving even the concept Looney Tunes of all these characters that used to have their home in 7-8 minute shorts that were run before a movie. It's like that world is long gone. But now shorts are coming back because streaming is perfect for it. You don't have to fit any time slot, and you know the Disney classic characters and Looney Tunes, all perfect for shorts, little 7-minute bite-sized pieces. So yeah,
this has been just a mind-blowing conversation, so much deeper and further than I expected. We're almost out of time. Actually, we probably are out of time, but Jim has been in our virtual audience, and he had a comment just a second ago that I'm going to have him come on camera and unmute himself to mention that comment, and if he has any quick questions. Hi, Jim.
Hello. Yeah, my question or statement was about, you know, we had before HBO Max, we had something called DC Universe. And DC Universe was a streaming, you know, where they would show, they were originally Doom Patrol was on, Titans was on, Swamp Thing was on, and they did all these DC shows. And one of the cool things, you know, that they did and introduced, and this opens up streaming to even more, is that you're allowed to read comics. They would, like, the new comics were presented within your, or, you know, or comics within the last month or so, you're able to read them. So you'd go, oh, I want to read that, you know, storyline with Superman, and you click it and it would pull it up. I mean, I think, you know, just television shows is limiting, you know, streaming could be so much more like what DC Universe has tried. I mean, it's something new. It's something unique. And, we shouldn't think of normal television, but think of other options, as you were saying, the shorts, where, we can bring those back, bring back reading material as well. Instead of watching like CNN, let's Wall Street Journal, click on that. Make it a little bit more robust. Make it a little bit. Go on.
No, I was going to say what you're pointing out is it makes a lot of sense, and it's part of, like we were saying, about the evolution that's taking place, and we'll have to see where it goes, because it's also true that like every time a new medium or a new method of delivering media comes along, it usually bases itself more comfortably in what happened in the past, because that's just the easiest way to go. Like when TV first started, it was mainly radio and stage, and then they found what the TV grammar was, and same thing with everything. And streaming, in a sense, you're right, it has so much potential to incorporate so many different ways of experiencing content, but they're sticking right now with what they're comfortable with and what makes sense to them as a business model. Also, it's the money that's driving everything. So it's like, oh, let's make a bunch of TV style stuff and put that out there. But who knows where to wind up being? DC Universe may have had some of those elements of, these are things that more people will start to play around with and incorporate. And we can only hope that, in the next few years, we'll probably see some of these things fall away. Some more of them consolidate a little bit, as also often happens. And then maybe we'll start to see more of the kind of thing you're talking about happen more often too. I think that's pretty likely.
And the deconstruction of the schedule is great. Like removing that from, so network TV back in the old days, and still now, they had a big schedule, which was, this show will follow this show because it's a good lead in. We'll put this show here because it'll catch this type of viewer. And like, it's been sort of decimated by streaming. And DC Universe and a lot of those programs were picked up by HBO Max with their partnership deal. But that's perfect, because like Harley Quinn, the animated series, is a fantastic show that would have fit nowhere on a schedule. Maybe HBO or Showtime, one of their late night shows, but adult cartoons, not in terms of pornographic content, but just like graphic violence, extreme profanity, they don't tend to do as well, because it's sort of hard to watch like a stand-up comic or like an edited movie, and then here's a bunch of pen and ink like cussing. Because they tried with Spawn back in the 90s. They had a Spawn animated series, which was really well done, but didn't do well because it's sort of hard to couch that in for the viewer, where it's like, I'm watching this, now I've got cartoons cussing at me. But by itself, it's fantastic. Same thing with Titans, which is a great show, very underrated. But again, who wants to watch a spinoff of Batman set in Detroit where Robin and all these, and Cyborg and Beast Boy, they're all kind of disaffected, pissed off youth. They're all gritty, grimy, they're cussing and like graphic violence. That doesn't really fit on any network broadcast schedule. But in streaming, it's sort of like, well, yeah, I feel like I'm gonna watch this. I'm gonna watch Doom Patrol. I'm gonna flip over to Netflix, check out some Luke Cage and some Jessica Jones, because that's my wheelhouse. That where the viewer is making their own schedule, so you can have so much more content that fits stuff. And again, Harley Quinn is fantastic. It's the best version of Harley Quinn, I think, at least in my opinion, ever, that's been put out. I love Margot Robbie. She's fantastic. Lots of props to the original Batman the Animated Series character, but like Harley Quinn, which is Katie Kyoko, I believe, is doing the voice in that one. It's fantastic, but it absolutely would not work on any other platform besides a streaming platform, because there's nothing it could lead into. There's nothing that could lead into it. It's such a unique, amazing, violent, funny, graphic, well-produced property. It needs to kind of stand by itself.
I think Sci-Fi Channel did take season 1 and aired it, on like a late night Saturday night or Friday night or something like that. But yeah.
Well, I think that is actually a very good place to kind of wrap things up. We are well past our hour time slot now, speaking of old models. But I want to thank Dr. Arnold Blumberg and T. Aaron Cisco, and also Jim Sues for being part of our virtual audience. I appreciate everyone tuning in for our comparing streaming services, and I hope that you enjoy all of the other programming and events that we have available as part of Console Room 2021 Time Crash. Thank you, everybody.